Hi, welcome back to the Degrees of Light and Shadow study exercise. Before you begin on to the next form, go ahead and write on your page the different degrees of light and shadow and identify them where on the cone they are. So I'll go ahead and write highlight. My highlight is right there. So I drew an arrow there. Next, we would have the lights or midtones. So I can write midtones, which go right next to it from there. We have the core shadow right there. So I identified the core shadow. I have some reflected light as well. So I can write reflected light here and draw an arrow right there on the edge. Then I have my cast shadow, which is right here where the light is casted behind, the shadow is casted behind the object. And technically I also have my occlusion shadow right here at the bottom of the object. So that is pretty much everything. You could also write, I have dark tones in here as well. So I could also write dark tones if I wish, right? And put them right sort of next to the core shadow. And now I have completely identified everywhere where my light source is streaming down onto my object, creating the highlight, then the lights and midtones, the darker tones, my core shadow, additional dark tones back here, then the reflected light, the cast shadow, and the occlusion shadow. So why don't you go ahead and do that and identify that in your first drawing as well. Okay, now let's go ahead and move on to drawing the cylinder. So I want to make sure I have a nice sharp pencil. So I'm going to go ahead and sharpen my 6B pencil here again. I like to keep a nice sharp pencil, and I like to use the 6Bs throughout. You're welcome to use a range of your pencils if you wish. I kind of need to use the 6B on here so you can see my work. But if you're struggling to get things accurate, go ahead and use your harder pencils, your 2H or your 2B, to sketch things out and then build up your surface. Okay, so drawing the cylinder. Same kind of similar concept with the cone. I can, I'm at a space now in my drawing practice where I can probably just go ahead and just draw my my cylinder without special guidelines, right? Really want to make sure that this curves quite a lot here. Really the edge wraps around quite a bit. My top of my cylinder is more narrow of ellipse than the bottom curve. So I can do that pretty good. If you need some help and you're struggling with proportions and symmetry, yeah, go ahead and draw that center line down, and then that can really help you map things out. You can also do this method. You can start with a rectangle. You can start with a rectangle here to help guide you, and then cut out the shapes that you need. And then all of that can be strategies to help you. You can also use the sighting technique, which I've demonstrated before, by, putting your hand out and measuring the various ratios, right? So I could measure the ratio of the side, horizontal width, compare that to the top, and figure out how many, widths does it take to fit into the top. All those strategies can help you with proportions if you are struggling. So I'm going to go ahead and erase some of my guidelines here because I don't need them. And now I'm going to, once again, kind of just identify where that coarse shadow is, which is kind of right along the, about the 3/4 edge here. And I'm going to do this one with shading. And I forgot to write hatching here, so I'm going to write cone plus hatching over there. So we got a cylinder plus shading, and what I'm going to do here now is I'm going to start using the same technique I was using in my swatches, small elliptical marks to really start to build up where that coarse shadow is located. And I don't need to make it perfect right away. I need to get something on the page just so I can see it, and then I can start improving it along the way. I'm not pressing full pressure quite yet because I'm just going to try and build it up and start to get something on my page to respond to. In drawing, there's no need to be perfect right out of the gate with one move. Build these things up and then refine along the way. And that, to me, that takes a lot of the pressure outside of being perfect. It means I can kind of just work my way gradually and get it right throughout the process, right? Trusting that process, and then when I'm ready to say, hey, this looks pretty close, now I can go ahead and really finalize my values and refine my drawing. So the coarse shadow fades into the midtones quite quickly here. So I'm trying to get that smooth blend just to gradually build it. Notice I'm holding way back here on the edge of my pencil. If you're up here, a couple things happen. You press too hard, it's a little bit uneven, and then you end up possibly smudging because you're holding your hands right on the paper, right around it. So if you learn to hold back here more, you get a little bit more finesse, a little bit more accuracy, and you don't smear your graphite as much. So I'm just slowly building up these values, these midtones now. Just building them up slowly here. My highlight, really the only highlight is right at the very, very edge. Most of this is very light midtones, 5, 10% to 20%. So you got to get really nuanced in how you see the subtleties of value. Sometimes squinting your eyes can help, but very rarely is anything pure white. The only thing that's really pure white is like the strongest highlight. And even then, that strong highlight still might be like 5% gray. And it really comes forward just by the fact that we have the contrast between the dark and those lights. The darker our shadows are, then the lighter our highlights appear to be. So I'm going to try and be very, very light. I'm using only my 6B here. And when you get really good with drawing and sensitive to the pressure, you can pretty much use the 6B for everything. But those, 2 H's, 2 B's do come in handy, and you're welcome to use those as well. What I like, excuse me, what I like about the 6B is that it's soft, so it really picks up that texture of the paper. And then you get that, just the sort of mottled surface that comes from the paper texture. So I'm just slowly blending these things out, smoothing my transitions as best as I can. And I'm thinking that that's looking like a pretty good start here. So now what I can do is I can really start to press harder and build up my shadow depth even more. And I think the video here is kind of messing it up a little bit. I'm actually getting some reflection on the shininess of the graphite here. So you can see that's coming from the light that I have here, but you can see when I lift this up, you can see how dark it gets, right? So that's the kind of deep shadow you want to get in your drawing. I'll be sure to post a photograph of this without the shiny part of the graphite, making it look lighter than it is. One of the downfalls of, teaching drawing online, I highly recommend, in the future, I recommend you taking art classes in person. They are, I think, a lot better and easier, more engaged. I mean, granted, yes, you can play this video back over and over again and rewatch it several times, but there's just a lot that I think gets lost in translation, and that's hard to control for when you're making this content and recording it. Plus, I don't really get to see you drawing in person and offer you real-time feedback, You submit your drawings when they're complete, and I can't really watch you draw and offer feedback to help you, improve along the way. It's just kind of like I see what you did, and then I respond to it, right? Whereas in person, I could give you real-time feedback and really help you out. So, be sure, I think, in the future, try to enroll in as many in-person art classes as you can, if that's something that you're able to do. Okay, that's looking pretty good. You can see, actually, I think it could get a little darker here. So let's make this a little bit darker. Let me lift it up again so you can kind of see a little bit better without the glare. Now what I want to do is I want to get the occlusion in and the cast shadow. So I'm just going to kind of draw a loose shape here of what my cast shadow looks like. And then I'll really press hard here. And it might reflect again because I'm pressing hard. Graphite has a sheen to it. It's a little shiny. Again, just using those circular motions to really build up the value here. And then I really want to cut in my value edge here along the edge of my cylinder to really get the sense that it's not this line that's the edge of the cylinder, but it's the meeting of the light value and the dark value here. And that becomes the edge of the cylinder. And that will really give you communicate a lot of volume, the better you get at that. And now I'm going to sort of fade out, soften this edge of the cast shadow because it usually softens at the edge. And then I can bring this into some of the occlusion here as well to just really ground it. I do have a little bit of a mistake here, so I'm going to tighten that up. And then I can come in and I can start to draw the background a little bit in here. So again, I've got this sort of line that's right about here. And by drawing that line, I really give this cylinder a place to sit, right? So then I can shade in the background and take this outline I have here of my cylinder, which was my guide, and I can melt that outline into the values to create a new value edge here. And now that highlight on the left side of the cylinder, where it meets the shadow in the background, becomes the edge, the value edge of the cylinder, of the form. And that really makes it then add a tremendous amount of volume and space being created because we don't have outlines anymore. In real life, none of the things we see in real life have outlines around them, right? It's all about how light meets and interacts with your objects. So the more you get used to that, the better you get at drawing three-dimensional forms. So I'm going to wrap it around here at the top as well, so I can mark in my top of my cylinder. And then the cylinder is a little bit darker on this top corner than the background. So here's kind of where I would reverse it a little bit. I'd make the cylinder a little bit darker there, but then slowly as it drops down, it does get darker again, particularly here at the bottom. So I will map that out accordingly and try and get that to show through in my drawing. I'm going to bring this up just a little bit more so it feels less like an outline or like a halo and more like a space I'm creating in the background. By extending this value out into the background, it really helps it translate that background as a space. Notice when it's really dark here along the edge, it feels like a halo, and that will actually flatten out your drawing. But if I slowly fade that out into the value of the background, then it starts to appear more like spatial depth than sort of halo outline. And then we get, again, more value. And now what can be kind of fun in some of these as you get these studies is as you get to the edge, you can give it a little bit of gestural mark making, and then that'll give it a little bit of style there at the end. And we do have some values in the foreground here a little bit that help to clean up the edges down below the edge of the table. So let's see, I want to get very lightly map that in because it's about a mid-tone gray down here at the base with the gray color of the piece of fabric here. And again, I can kind of let it get a little gestury and loose there at the edges, which can be fun. And then I'm going to go ahead and just use my detail eraser or whatever eraser you have to just sort of clean up that highlight and really, really pop it. And now I have a pretty good drawing of this cylinder here that looks a little darker when I raise it up like that. It looks like I could push my dark values a little bit darker through the core shadow. So if I were to do that, I could just really deepen that core shadow a little bit. And then again, the more value contrast we have across our object, then the more form it's going to have, the more volume it's going to have, and then the more range we have to work with from the lights all the way to the darks. And that just really helps pump up our drawing. I'm also noticing there is a little bit of value here at the top cylinder as well. It's not perfectly white, so I'm going to add just a tiny little bit in there as well, just so that feels a little really, really natural. And then I can just kind of keep polishing it up along the way and keep making it better. So yeah, there is the cylinder with shading. Now I want you to go ahead and draw the sphere on your own with shading and see how you do. I think the sphere is the hardest one. I'll give you a little tip on how to draw some circles. I like to just draw my circle initially with a draw through technique until I get the circle kind of right, and then I refine from there. So I can kind of push it a little darker here so you can see, and then I can refine it from there. Other strategies can be to create a sort of a target or a cross inside here. You can use your ruler to help with that. The more spokes on the wheel that you give yourself, the more you can help guide yourself into that circle. But the reason I like to do this is because if you think about the mechanics of the arm, my shoulder is a ball joint. So if I just move my shoulder the way it naturally moves, then in theory it moves in a circle. And if I just record that and do the draw through technique, then I can usually get it pretty darn close. So that's your challenge now. Draw the sphere with shading and recreate that image you have on the Canvas page. All right, everybody. Hey, good job, good work, and I look forward to seeing your results.